and welcome to Loving the Planets for the week of January 14th, 2018. I'm Armand Diaz in New York.
And I'm Margaret Gray in Dublin. So quite a week, Armand, isn't it? I mean, we've got the Capricorn new moon, we've got Venus changing signs, we've got the sun changing signs. So it's finally, I think, a shift in terms of energies kind of midweek for relationships. But I guess we should probably start with the new moon in Capricorn, which is conjunct Venus. What are your thoughts about that for relationships?
Well, we've had this sort of Sun, Venus, and now the Moon, all for a while, and it brings things together. It's a continuation of last week's energy, and I feel that we're just coming away as the week begins. We're just coming away from that edgy kind of Venus-Uranus square, which may have thrown things up in the air a little bit. I feel that we're sort of like taking things apart and putting them together rapidly at this point in time, and probably not entirely sure yet where we are with some things, although last week may have affected some real changes.
That was really intense last week. I mean, a lot of people having a lot of challenges in relationships that seem to just come out of the blue, even people who had been together long term, and suddenly all these things erupted and came up. So I think people will be relieved that the energies are shifting a bit. And of course, the new moon is a time of new beginnings. So it's a time of really planting seeds for something new. And Capricorn is so nice and earthy. So I think it kind of brings us a little bit to the ground, even though it is square Uranus. But I think the conjunction to Venus is very important because it kind of really brings us back into that feeling of our self-value, what we value in relationships, back to that whole theme of values, which really, again, in itself is very, very grounding. And with the sextile to Jupiter, there's a little bit of expansion there. Now, the square to Uranus is an interesting one because really we never know with Uranus, what it's going to bring, but it could help us with planting those new seeds, maybe in terms of commitments, maybe in terms of work that we're prepared to do in relationships, because really Capricorn wants us to do the work.
Aren't you always the optimist, Margaret?
Of course, yeah. One of us has to be Armand.
Somebody's got to have the job, and you're welcome to it.
Thank you.
I've got to say that I think that this square to Uranus, the Sun, Venus, and Capricorn, would kind of like to know where things are. It was the same thing we had last week. Where are we with things? And then here comes this square to Uranus, and Uranus in Aries is very independent. And I kind of want to do my thing and maybe rebel against structure a little bit. I'm not sure that I want to be hemmed in or committed to things. And I think that that's liable to be, as we come into the new moon, again, away from that Uranus-Venus square, that might be a very edgy, things are up in the air time. I don't think we can appreciate it until Wednesday when Venus goes into Aquarius, which is Uranus's sign, and then later on Friday when the sun goes into Aquarius. Then we'll be in a more open, free, take a deep breath, airy type of space. Let's hope. And so I think right at the new moon and coming into it, the beginning part of the week, it could feel very edgy. And then later in the week, we could start to, sort of breathe a little bit and sort of take things a little bit more objectively.
So let us know, viewers, how you experience it. So what do you think? Optimistic or not? Moving right along to Venus in Aquarius, I think the great thing about Venus in Aquarius is it really helps us to stand back and get an overview of situations. So it really helps us to detach a little bit from those very intense emotions which were stirred up last week. And also just to say that I think Venus in Aquarius is great for friendships. It really makes us look around and think, oh, would I like to make some new friends? How can I spend some time with my current friends? So it's really a great energy. And then when the sun moves into Aquarius, it kind of really solidifies that. So really to look ahead in terms of the next month, that it's really a good time to be thinking about our friendships, because we often talk about intimate relationships, but we don't talk about the importance of friendships, which really are kind of crucial for most of us in our life.
And then we'll write. Actually, it's my job to write the blog about Venus and Aquarius for those should be up around the 17th. So check that out on our website, relationshipsandastrology.com. But I think that, Venus in Capricorn, formalities, a little bit more formal, a little more structured, a little bit more wants to know what the bottom line is. Venus in Aquarius, yeah, there's a little bit more openness. Venus, it's principled. Aquarius is very principled, so it's not anything goes, but we're not bound by tradition. And I do think it's better for friendships, but friendships that like we really resonate on a kind of idealistic level. People that are really on the same page with you. Less so for people that just happen to be, random living down the hall or something like that type of people. I think that you connect on a sort of more idealistic level. But I do think that it is, I wouldn't say it's a nicer energy. It's a little bit more freeing energy after the more traditional constraints of Capricorn.
Yes, and it's also making connections with people across all kinds of boundaries, across countries, across cultures, all kinds of. So I think it does open our mind a little bit more to other people's points of views, to listening more, to kind of taking a step back. So I think that's kind of exciting, and I agree. It's also that intellectual connection, isn't it? Great for astrology, of course. So if anybody's interested in studying astrology, to think about that. Which reminds me, we must get our course up for next year, of course, our one-year course, if anybody's interested. Now, the other thing that's happening before we leave, of course, to mention that Mars in Scorpio is trining Chiron, and it's also quincunx Uranus. That's on Thursday. So I think that's interesting because Mars is still that bit in Scorpio, that bit about emotions that's still there. And so that might feel a little iffy that day, not to be surprised if you suddenly feel a little out of sorts. One thing that really I think Mars, the Mars-Uranus aspect wants, it doesn't want any kind of manipulation. It wants people to be really as truthful as possible, as authentic as possible. It just does not do well with games or manipulations. Not that anyone would dream of doing that, of course.
No, I think that you're right about that. There's good potential that will feel a little edgy when it happens. But again, as we move more into the Aquarian energy, it starts to make more sense. And I think some of that self-protectiveness of Scorpio kind of drops away, where it's not needed. Where it's needed, of course, it's a good thing, but where it's not needed, we're able to sort of step back a little bit from it. Just want to say that as we get to the weekend, on a practical level, the moon is not really very far along, but it's waxing and it's in Pisces, and so it should be a little bit of an easier time on the weekend. Be good for some play, good for some enjoyment, maybe taking a movie or listen to some music, just a little more easygoing.
So quite an interesting week all in all, really, isn't it?
It sure is.
See you next week, Armand. Bye-bye.